I am here, Joe Reingold, with Elias Barron, and we're going to be interviewing for the One Story at a Time, Viva Shalom, celebrating Latin American Jews here in Dallas. Good afternoon. Hi, Elias. Tell us, where are you from originally, and where were your parents and grandparents living? Where were they from originally?
Yes, I was born and grew up in Mexico City. My father came from Lithuania in the 1920s as a teenager, and my mother came from the Ukraine also in the 1920s after the pogroms in the Ukraine. And both came with almost all of their families. My mother had like 2 aunts and uncle that came also that immigrated to Mexico. So we had a large family in Mexico, and my father came with all his brothers, 5, 6 brothers. They all came to Mexico. And I believe that at that time, people wanted to come to America, and America was the US. And when the US was not open for immigration, they say, well, just Mexico is next door. And they went to Mexico. And my father very often mentioned how fortunate were the Jews that went to Mexico instead of the US. He read all these Yiddish newspapers, Arrive Home, Der Tag, and other newspapers in Yiddish. And he was mentioning how people in New York, the seamstresses and making garments,
tailors,
that workers were kind of exploited. And in Mexico, there was a big economical opportunity. And most of Jews in Mexico at that time were doing financially very good. Mexico was a very kind and open country. My father said that when he was traveling to the country, and he was, for one time, he was in a wholesale with handkerchiefs, at kind of a small manufacturing. And he mentioned how people were so kind and patient, and when he couldn't speak well, they were very helpful. So Mexico was in those days some sort of paradise. The population was very small. When I was growing up in Mexico City, there were like 5 million people in the city. By the time we left and came to the US, there were over 20 million people. So can you imagine a place like, can you imagine all the Texans living just in Dallas? Not Dallas and Port, just in Dallas, everyone in Texas. So that could be a nightmare to imagine that. And Mexico was situated in a very beautiful place, is situated because of latitude and altitude. Mexico is at 7,200 feet above sea level. So it's usually cool in the morning and in the evening. And during the day, weather is just nice. And whenever you go someplace else in Mexico, you go down, you go over the mountains and go down. So usually you go to a place which is warmer. And since altitude is less, you feel so light and so relaxed. So going on vacation in Mexico was like, you really felt the vacation. You had the vacation feeling, a warmer place, less pressure from altitude. And then at that time, the majority of the Jewish community was kind of Jews from Europe, Eastern Europe. There were also communities from people coming from Syria, Aleppo, and another place. There were Halebis and Shamis, and there were people from Sephardic traditions from Bulgaria, from Athens, from Turkey, from Greece, from Turkey. And each community had their own schools, their own synagogues, but everybody belonged to the Jewish Sports Center. So the community was very close-knit. As I was growing up, you just knew everybody. When there was in Mexico, they had the quinceañeras, birthday parties when girls became 15 years old, and there was a big party, and you didn't need to be invited to go there. You went to the Jewish Sports Center, and then you heard that there is a party, and then you just went there, and you met everybody. So it was a very interesting, warm, and pleasant community. But on the other hand, there was a time of a lot of air pollution. There is a lake, the Texcoco Lake, and it is a little bit higher than Mexico City. And the government said there was a risk of floodings, and they dried up the lake. The bad tongues said that the reason they dried the lake is that at the time of the conquest, there was a battle there between the Aztecs and Hernan Cortes that was trying to flee with a treasury from the temple, gold and other things. And when they were defeated, all the treasury fell into the lake. And so people said that they dried up the lake looking for the treasury. But the fact was that after drying the lake, after the Mexican Revolution that started 1910, there was a intention, desire, need to give peasants land. And so big, large ranches, extensions of land were forbidden. They were expropriated, and they were split into little parcels and given to farmers, landless farmers. And they thought to do that with the bed of the Texcoco Lake, but the bottom of the lake was sandy. And after time, dust storms came into the city, and they brought a lot of dust. And many people settled there, over 1 million people, and they didn't have sanitary conditions, so they defecated open air. So the winds came, and all the droppings came flying with the air every place. So there was a lot of diseases, these respiratory, digestive things. The kids were always sick. So in a certain way, because of air pollution, we decided to leave Mexico and came to the US. Additionally, in the middle of the city, there was an oil refinery, there was a cement factory, and there was some glass factories, and they produce a lot of pollution. Now those things are gone, and the air quality has improved a lot. But people in Mexico always were worried after Cuba that a revolution could come, because some people were very well off, and there was a lot of poverty and poor people. So the community always was worried that something like Cuba could also happen in Mexico. But the community is still there. It is striving. It is doing very well. And most of
Well, how old were you, Elias? How old were you when you left Mexico? What did you do after high school?
I need to see your lips. If not, I cannot hear you.
Okay. Okay. What did you do after high school, and how old were you when you left Mexico?
Can you repeat your question?
Sure. What did you do Well, first of all, tell me about your high school years, where you were, and what was your favorite things to do in high school. And then what did you do after high school?
Okay, I attended a Jewish elementary school and junior high school, and I learned Yiddish, and I speak fluently Yiddish. And I also learned a little bit of Hebrew, and then I learned more afterwards. Then my school ended with junior high. And then to a high school, I went to there was a Catholic school that had a very good name, was a very good school. And then I did high school there, was 2 years. And after that, I studied in the School of Engineering, and I graduated as an engineer. And my activities in Mexico were, I believe, kind of special and was not very common. I belonged to an outing club. And when I was in college, almost every other weekend, we went excursions to the mountains. And Mexico is situated in such a place that within 3 hours drive, you can go out every weekend, every 2 weeks, and you won't be in the same place for a whole year. It was just amazing and so beautiful. So I came to Dallas with my boots and my backpack, expecting to go and visit the Dallas mountains. There were no mountains here, everything was far away. But here I found the Sierra Club, and I had 2 groups of friends. With one group, we used to do backpacking trips, went to California and Washington State, and we went all over. So the difference was that in the States, I went for 1 week backpacking trips instead of weekend mountain trips. And there was another group, we went paddling, and we paddled all over rivers, all over the country, and deploy in the ocean. So what is interesting, what you do in one place, you can carry over and bring it and find it in the new place where you are. I was used to the Orthodox style of schools in Mexico. And at that time, everyone went to an Orthodox school. That doesn't mean that you were Orthodox, but there was just one. And I came here to the US, and there were many styles, and it was kind of confusing at one time. Then when we came in 1983, there were not too many, well, most of schools were either Reform or a couple of them conservative, but there were no big rabbis, and there was the JCC, this program, Choice of Jewish Learning. And I participated in a book club that we read kind of Jewish books. And somebody there recommended me to teach at the Choice of Jewish Learning. So I was teaching Kabbalah courses and Jewish mysticism and Torah. And so there were no rabbis. So I was, there is a saying in Mexico, to have one eye in the land of the blind. So I had one eye. There were a lot of blind people. And we had a wonderful time studying.
I want to ask you something. Wait, right there.
Yes, I had time. So it took a whole week to prepare 1 hour class. And I didn't know Hebrew well at that time. So I was struggling to translate. And that's how I learned Hebrew. And for a couple of years, I was teaching a Choice of Jewish Learning. But then things came, and more qualified people came, and rabbis, and they started teaching, and the Choice of Jewish Learning ended. For me, I think I do not know exactly what happened. But it was a wonderful time having people with whom to share Jewish studies. And I came here and I did 3 masters, and I became young again. In Mexico, I was an engineer. I developed software, and I came here to sell my software. But then I got 3 masters. I got young again, and the third one was in counseling. So I worked in counseling for some time. And for some time, I worked for the Jewish Historical Society, and just briefly, 1 year maybe. And so being in Dallas has been an incredible experience.
Oh, can I stop you? Elias, let me ask you though, you haven't explained one thing that's very important. How did you make the decision, or your family, to come to Dallas, Texas, of all places? And did you consider anywhere else?
What happened is that in Mexico, I developed a programming language, a computer programming language. When I started, after graduating, I came to the US. I was going to do some graduate work at the University of Illinois, Chicago Circle, and was doing research at Presbyterian Luke Hospital in Chicago. And then in '67, the Six-Day War was coming. And since I had in mind to go to Israel, I, with other dreamers, went to the Israeli consulate in Chicago and said, we want to go to Israel. And said, no, you cannot go to Israel for the war, we don't need you. And I said, we came a couple of times there. And then at the end said, well, if everybody is mobilized, who is in the kibbutzim picking up oranges? I want to go and do that. And they say, okay, come tomorrow, I will let you know. And so they said, yes, you can go. And I left, went to Israel before the, just a couple of days before the war. My sister was there and was pregnant, and her husband was mobilized. And it is a whole very long story. So I came back to Mexico, started working for IBM. And at that time, the hardware was rented, and software and system engineers were part and given for free to the clients. And there was no software. And I developed a programming language started while working for IBM. And then I became self-employed. And I say I became self-employed. And I marketed my language. And there was one company, one bank that was user of my software. And one of my users moved to Dallas. He was living in Hearst. And once he called me and asked me to come and install my software in his computer in his company. And we had been thinking and looking for places where to move in the US to get away from pollution and crowded that Mexico City was. So I came a couple of times, stayed with him in his house, and I just felt great. I could go out and jog. And one day I went back home and I told my family, okay, we're going to Dallas. And we just came to Dallas. And the first 6 months, I didn't work, didn't do anything, just supported the kids with learning English and getting adapted to school. And after 6 months, I then started working. And so it was indirectly because of work that we came here and we settled. And so here we are.
How did you find the Jewish community here when you first came? What was it like for you?
Can you repeat?
I know you said that the synagogues were different than what you were used to in Mexico, but how else did you find the Jewish
yes,
community?
we are members. We have been members of, now we belong to Anshe Torah. And I have been members of many shuls. Initially it was Orthodox shuls, and so like 4 or 5. Now we do Zoom. And Nechama, my wife, she's doing more Zoom than I do nowadays. And but we have been kind of passively active in the community all the time in one way or another. Nechama now is more active than I am. And there was a time that I was more active than she was. So my son, he works also something with software, and he is a rabbi. He was ordained he studied in Los Angeles, but he doesn't work as a rabbi. He works with software, and So he kind of does something with schools wherever he has lived. He lived in San Diego, and now he lives in Maine. And it's kind of the ideal way of being a rabbi, that you can teach Torah without depending on a shul job. And that was my wish when he went to rabbinical school. Enjoy your learning enjoy Torah. And I wish you that you don't become a synagogue rabbi.
He listened to you, right? He listened to you.
You do Torah for the love of Torah without all the surrounding issues and things.
And what does your daughter do?
Right.
I know you have a daughter also. What does she do here?
Yes, well, he's doing some things I used to do, but maybe in a better and more professional way. I constantly, for some time after the Choice of Jewish Learning, I always had a group that came home and we studied Torah, different topics of Torah and Talmud. So he would see people coming home and studying Torah. And for one time I used to go, there was in Arlington a group of B'nai Noach, people there interested in Torah learning. So I used to teach them in there. And then there is a time for everything, and all that ended. And so both my son and my daughter and her husband are very active in their schools and in the community. And so you kind of pass the baton, you're active at one time, and then the turn is for the young generation to go on with whatever you were doing. And now there is something that I find it very beautiful. There is a midrash that when God created the Adam HaKadmon, the original, the first person, the first man, that he was able to see from one end of the world to another, Misop Olam ad Sofo. And when God said what would happen with generation of the Babel Tower and the flood, he concealed he kind of restricted the length of view that person could see, and a person was able to see just what is beyond his nose, but was not able to see Misop Olam ad Sofo. So I decided that I would ride my bicycle and paddle my kayak from one end of the world to another. And I have been riding my bicycle all over. And in 2 more weeks, I'm doing a bicycle ride from the Atlantic to the Pacific, from Washington, D.C. to Florence in Oregon. And it takes 75 days to go across the US, 3,800 miles. And I have gone from Seattle to Boston, from Canada to Mexico. And I have paddled the Mississippi River, the Minnesota rivers, and all the rivers in Texas. And you know, it's such a special thing for me. That is the big tefillah, that you go out and you know what is the most beautiful tefillah that you can say. You point and you say, wow, you admire the masterworks of the great painter of the universe. And that's what I am, is most my shul now. I go and admire the masterworks of the great painter of the universe. And so that is basically
it. Well, okay, so I have one more question for you then. Besides God being the master of the universe, what are you the most proud of that you've done in your life?
Say it again.
What are you the most proud of, or something that you're very proud of that you have accomplished in your life so far?
Well, I think I always love to guide myself with teachings and wisdom from Torah. And since my days in high school, I enjoy reading Torah, Sefer Mishlei, Kohelet, Psalms, the book of Job. And you learn about life. And I was guiding myself by those things. So when I retired, uh, I like now to write poetry. So in the morning, I'm drinking my tea and a word comes to my mind, and then associations happen, and then a poem is born. So almost every day I write something.
Right.
And that's a connection with take pictures of the moon, the sun, watch my backyard nature preserve, and then a bobcat comes and butterflies come and bird comes, and it is just amazing. Last year when we were kind of a lot of time at home, suddenly I discovered what a beautiful nature preserve there is in the back of my house. And when there was the that everything was closed last year, then I discovered a lot of beautiful places in Dallas suburbs. I live in Plano, and I mapped like 50 different bicycling routes in Plano, Frisco, McKinney, and then just all over east, west, north, and south. And it is incredible, Joe, that there are so many tree-covered trails, and you live in Dallas in the middle of the city, and you imagine and you feel like you live in the middle of a forest with wonderful trees and incredible nature. And so Dallas is such a beautiful place. And you know, like in Torah, they say it is Torah shebektav, Torah shebe'al peh, anistar ve'anigla, the oral Torah, the written Torah, the revealed and the concealed. And you find that in your everyday life. There is the Dallas that we all see with freeways and roads and things. But then there is this other Dallas of the parks and the trails and of nature. And so I go and take pictures, and people ask me, where is that? I say, here it's just around near my house. And that's the beauty of Torah, that whatever you are reading, you can bring it to your daily life. And so you need only to have eyes to see and ears to hear. And it's amazing what you can see and hear.
Very good. Yes.
Now for the Trans-America bicycle ride, I was recommended a book by a man who did a route similar to this one. And on the way, he was listening and recording bird song. So can you imagine that you go to a symphony, a choir, a celestial choir of birds, and you are every day in a concert. You wake up and you listen to birds. You are out there. This trip is mostly camping. You're out there, and you're out there for the sunrises and the sunsets. And you have time, and you talk with the master, with the great painter of the universe, and you're friends with him here. And so that's the way I would summarize my live in Dallas, in Texas. And
Well, it sounds beautiful to me, and we wish you well on your journey, your bike ride. It sounds fantastic. And thank you so